Sachin, am I audible?
Yes, Vishal.
Sachin, now you can start.
Sure. Good morning, everyone. My name is Sachin Kumar, and I'm your today's host. I'm 2x certified, and I'm closely associated with New Delhi SFTC Developer Group. This is my Twitter handler, twitter.com, sachinforce.com, and I am in Salesforce domain from more than 5 years. So today we have our third session for our D2C series. So very well-known person. The speaker is Rupesh Bhatia, sir. So welcome, Rupesh. He is a D2C consultant and expert. And okay, let's start with the New Delhi SFTC group. So we are in the community group since 2016. This is our Twitter handler, twitter.com New Delhi SFTC Doug. Hashtag this is our Impact Salesforce Saturday is our initiative which was taken by New Delhi SFTC group. So this is our Trailblazer community group link bit.ly New Delhi community. So New Delhi developer group also have their website. So that is newdelhisfdcdoug.com. So you can go over there and check whatever the initiative has taken by New Delhi SFTC group and our past and upcoming sessions. So you can get all these information over there. Let's move to the next one, Impact Salesforce Saturday. So Impact Salesforce Saturday is a series of online Salesforce Saturday sessions that this program is initiated by New Delhi SFTC group. So previously, the main motive of that session is to share the knowledge virtually. So we are doing this for a couple of years now, and this program previously that called as Virtual Salesforce Saturday, now we have rebranded it, like we have changed that name, Impact Salesforce Saturday. You can find our past and upcoming sessions over these links. We will post those links in the chat window once the introduction part will finish. So New Day, as I mentioned over there, New Delhi SFDC Doug has taken several initiatives. So recently we have taken new initiative that is Talent Central. This is something like to connect like students who is having exposure in Salesforce, who have the knowledge with the company HR who is looking for the freshers. So that portal is something like Naukri or Monster, but that is especially only for the person who is in Salesforce ecosystem. So I can urge to each and every student, go over there and register yourself. You will definitely find better opportunity over there. This is the link, talentcentralglobal.com. The another initiative which was taken by New Delhi SFTC group, that is Mentorship Central. So that portal is something like to connect mentors with mentees. Like if you are growing your career in Salesforce ecosystem, like if you are in the like senior associate position and you want to move to as a consultant, so you will find the experienced person over there who can guide you with their guided path. Like that you can improve your productivity and you can learn more into Salesforce system. So this is the link, bit.ly SF mentorship central. So I can urge each and everyone, please go over there and start growing their career. So I would like, at the end, I would like to thank our today's sponsor, Walid Alhor, Cloud Vandana, and Grey Ops. Like, as you people already know, in this overall D2C series, we are going to 20 Udemy course vouchers for sharing and visibility by Walid Alhor. So we have activated the Udemy course, I think, for the previous sessions, and for this session and our social media champion, we will do after this session, like 1 or 2 days after. So for the social media, I would say that you can go to the Twitter, take the picture during the session, and do more posts over the Twitter, LinkedIn, with the hashtag impact Salesforce Saturday, hashtag D2C, and at the rate New Delhi SFDC group. You can tag each and everyone, like who is related with the New Delhi SFDC group, so that we will decide the winner at the end of the series. Okay, now stage is your, Rupesh. Let me stop sharing.
Thank you, Sachin. And hello, everyone. A warm welcome on a Saturday morning. I know it's tough times and really appreciate you all taking time on a weekend to attend this session. I hope you find worth it. So, today we are on the third session of the D2C, right? So, let me show you what we have covered till now, right? We have covered my Caesars to Salesforce journey and the consulting mindset, the core of why D2C is important for each one of us. That's what we covered on 9/5, 9/12, which was last Saturday. We covered the pre-sales life cycle, why everyone should really explore and deep dive into the pre-sales world, because it has lot many opportunities, lot many areas to get exposure, understand how businesses are run, and what is the like the nuances or the activities that goes around in a pre-sales life cycle, which will help you to get more exposure and more learnings in your career as you move along, right? Today what we are going to see is basically how the implementation life cycle works and what's the communication skills that are required, or the challenges that we normally see, and how you can overcome those. That's some tips and tricks from my side on improving your communication skills as well, right? So with that, let's deep dive into today's session. So last week when we wrapped up the session, we said that we have won the project, and so today we are going to go ahead and execute that project, right, and take you to the overall implementation journey of once you receive a brand new project for your company, how do you go about executing it. And today's session will more relate to you as developers or as admins, because somewhere we are all related to a delivery of a project, right? We all build solutions, we all do the coding, configuration, deployment, do the test cycles, data migrations, integrations, all of that comes into a project delivery aspect, right? I'm going to highlight areas where you typically tend to ignore in your day-to-day job profile. We are more focused on delivering sprints or delivering user stories, right? I'm going to give you a holistic view of what an entire project lifecycle looks like and which are the different phases where as developers or as admins you can really step up and contribute more, right? And the sole intent of this series has been that how you can pick up those nuances around yourself in your day-to-day jobs and step up by adopting this consulting mindset. Okay, with that, let's look at different implementation lifecycle phases, right? Any project starts off with a discovery or a requirement gathering phase, right? Whatever you have discussed it in the pre-sales lifecycle was at a very high level. You now need to work with the customer to understand those requirements in detail, figure out what data model you want, figure out what kind of integrations you have to implement, what's the integration approach, what is the infrastructure setup required, what kind of licensing you really require for your projects to get deployed, what kind of personas you are dealing with when you talk about deploying your application for your end users, right? and so on and so forth. So there's a lot that goes into a discovery phase or a requirement gathering phase, right? Typically, these requirement gathering phases are from 2 weeks to 4 weeks, depends upon the nature and the scope of the project. At times, it might even go for 1 month to 2 months, depending upon the complexity and the scope, right? Once you have gathered the details, that's when the technical folks, the architects and the leads basically brainstorm and come up with the overall solution design at a granular level, right? So during the RFP stages, you would have just given a high level picture to your customer that this is what we are going to implement. But how are you going to really implement? You now basically get down to the work, come up with a design document that this is how we will implement it step by step. This is our sprint plan. This is what we are going to deliver in each sprint, right? If you are in a truly agile mode, you will not plan way too ahead. You will plan for at least a couple of sprints in advance. So sprint 1 and sprint 2, you'll take care of it in your design phase itself. And then as you go along in a true agile manner of grooming your user stories before any new sprint comes up, that's how you go into an iterative mode of collaboration with the client stakeholders to understand more of the requirements, build them out, show them the demo, take a feedback, and then again go back to the drawing board, right? So that in a nutshell for you is the design and the build phase, right? How things move in a very agile manner. UAT phase is typically where you want the business users to do a final level of testing with the complete data volume, with the complete code base, whatever has been built over a period of time. You want them to give the final go, no go decision based on their level of confidence on the solution that you have developed, right? Once you have a go, no go, you might also have a data migration as an activity. Migration here is not a phase, right? Because migration, you might have to do it during your build phase, in your dev sandbox, in your SIT sandbox, or in your UAT sandbox, depending on how much data you want to test, right? But typically in UAT, you will go for a full data load if you are migrating legacy systems into Salesforce, where you want to carry over the historical data as well, right? Once you have validated the overall solution by the business users with the complete data set, that's where you get into the user training mode, right? So complex implementations would require business champions or business super users to get trained first, so that they can go back and train their actual users on their side, right? So the large global customers would always have a training section in place, and they would like the vendor or the partner to come in and train their super users. Super users are equipped with the right kind of knowledge about the application, about the technical solution and the functionality, so that they in turn can go and train their actual users, right? So because you as vendor or a partner cannot go and train, let's say, thousands of users at once, right? So what you do is you select top 50 people who are the super users and train them very well on the application, so that any first level query that comes from these users can be taken up by these super users, and then they can help them resolve it, right? And it makes sense, right? Because if you're talking about a global customer, let's say the customer is operating in, let's say, 10 different countries, you as a vendor or as a partner, right, cannot go and train every single country user, right? It's not possible. There are budget constraints, there are language constraints, there are cultural constraints, right? It makes sense to have a consolidated group getting trained from you, and then they go back to their individual teams, and then they do it in their own style, right? That's user training for you. Then you plan for the actual cutover once the trainings are done and when there's a thumbs up. You go for the cutover, do the deployments, do the data migration in prod, and whenever your sanity checks are done by the business before making the users live on the system, right? And then you get into the whole support model, where initial 2 to 4 weeks you give them the initial go live support, which you call it as hypercare, and from there onwards a support team takes it over. It could be the same team who has implemented the project, or it could be a different team. It could be the same company, or it could be a different company also. Normally what we have seen is implementation partners are different and your support partners are different totally. Okay, so then in that case you need to have all the documentation, all the technical knowledge sharing sessions with the another company, so that you can do the right KT, the right documentation is provided, so that they can do the support of that application as well. Now there are some terminologies used in the industry around this implementation versus support, right? And as we go along, I'll introduce those terminologies as well, so that if you ever hear them, don't get surprised, right? Because those are the kind of terms that they normally use. All right, so out of this, only data migration is an activity which is spread across all these phases, but rest all of them are dedicated phases through which a project implementation goes through. All right, so let's look at each phase in detail, right? And I'll share the nuances what I have faced in my career while dealing with customers, while doing these requirement gathering workshops with the customers themselves, right? So it all begins with a high level requirement which you have as part of your RFP or your SOW that gets signed, right? Or the statement of work that comes to you, that this is what we want to deliver as a project team, let's say next 6 months. You get into these requirement gathering workshops, right? And I'll tell you the nuances around it, right? So tomorrow, if you have been asked to deliver a project, okay, you are selected from a group of, let's say, 10 developers, that we trust you, we are confident of you to deliver this by sitting in the client phase, by sitting in the client location, right? So you are given the opportunity to go on site, right? And we are all happy. Yes, first on site, we'll get to explore a lot, we'll get to earn in foreign currency, we'll shop a lot. With all the excitement, we land up in front of the customer without really understanding what we are up for, right? And the first thing that hits us is, for that project to get started, is the requirement gathering workshop or the discovery workshop. How do I really prepare those for those workshops, right? What are the things that I need to take care of? Forget about on-site, right? Tomorrow, if there is a project where your company asks you to lead these discovery workshops, right? How would you get prepared mentally, and what are the things that you really need to plan for, right? First thing is, understand the SOW. You need to understand what was the agreed scope by the company for that client. What are the scope exclusions? What are the scope inclusions? What were the assumptions that were put in by the pre-sales team when doing the pre-sales life cycle? The reason that why that is important is, when you get into these workshops and you hear different opinions from different stakeholders, you can keep themselves or everyone aligned to the agreed scope only if you are aware of what was the scope in the first place. If you're not aware of it, people will take you for toss, and they will add in scope based on what they want from their system or what they want in their application, right? So you really need to be honest on what was agreed upon, what is not agreed upon, and you can say, okay, is this my job or is this project manager's job, right? Yes, primarily responsibility lies with the leadership, but as a good consultant, you should always be aware of the scope, right? Because then you can tailor your discussions accordingly, and you not waste hours and hours discussing about something which you are not supposed to deliver in first place, right? You'll have meaningful conversations with your stakeholders if you are aware of that. Now, it begins with scheduling those workshops, right? How much time you really think you need from your customer to detail out those requirements? For that to happen, you need to understand the high level requirements in a very good way. How will you take up those requirements? So let's say it's a Sales Cloud implementation. I'll begin with the security model. How many objects am I going to develop? Accounts, leads, contacts, opportunities. I'll break them into different modules: lead management, campaign management, account management, contact management, opportunity management, products. If there is quoting feature, quoting or contracting or billing or revenue management, you'll include all of those additional modules as well. So you really need to understand which are the modules that you're going to talk through, and how much time do you really think, based on the number of requirements, is there for each module. Let's say account management has, let's say, 5 line items in your requirement sheet. Okay, how much time you require with the business stakeholder? Like half a day or 1 day, based on what's the complexity of those requirements could be, right? At times we plan for half a day and the discussion goes on for 1 day. You need to be flexible enough to ensure that you're able to cover those topics within the set timeline and come up with the clear action items if you're not able to cover within the set timelines. Okay, so it begins with scheduling of those workshops, coming up with a high level timeline of how much time you require to execute those workshops, and you need to send out those calendar invites to all the business stakeholders or the IT stakeholders with whom you want to have that conversation, right? And keep in mind, these are business users, so they have a day-to-day job as well to do, right? They are not just here to support your project or give the required requirements or talk to you, but they have a day-to-day job of selling or servicing their customers. So they are going to leave their day-to-day job where they get salaries for or they earn money from, and they are going to spend that time with you as a consultant and give their precious time to you to understand the requirements in detail. So have that empathy that you are taking someone's productive time, and you have to be very cautious about how do you utilize that time. And at times these could be your VPs or your CTOs or business heads from different verticals, right? These are all high valued people within the client organization, right? So with that in mind, you have to schedule those workshops 2 weeks, 4 weeks, whatever is the time. Whatever goes in those workshops, you have to also document. At the end of the day, is the design team or the build team who's going to deliver those, whatever you have been discussing in those requirement gathering workshops, right? So the sole purpose of the requirement gathering workshop is to detail out the requirements to a level where my build team can take and start building on top of it, or where my architects can understand how the solution needs to be designed. They'll obviously have queries, so you have to clarify those queries in your upcoming sessions during the requirement gathering phase. Okay. First and foremost is understand the business processes, understand the IT landscape, how the Salesforce as an environment or as an application will interact with 10 other applications within the client landscape. What kind of Salesforce processes they want to implement. Before you go to Salesforce, first understand what are their business processes. How do they sell in a day-to-day life of a user, right? So that's what we call it as persona mapping or persona journey, right? You try to map that persona journey and then try to solution on top of it. Okay, if a person is taking, let's say, 10 days to sell something, what are the different applications which the person uses currently? What are the different rules and the checks that you have in the current systems, and how do you want to replicate that in your Salesforce system? What are the improvisation areas? What are their pain points, so that you can offer them the best solution that will take away their pain points, right? So the initial requirement gathering phase, at least 1 week, will be all going into understanding their current situation, understanding their day-to-day problems, understanding why they have put in this as a requirement. What do they really want to change in their day-to-day life? Only once you understand that bit, you'll be in a better position to provide them the right solution. Don't just jump into, as soon as you hear out requirement, don't just jump into providing solutions on day one. That is not always the best option. Okay, your technical mind, your developer mind might say you, okay, this is the right solution and we should go for it because I know it that this is how it works in Salesforce. No, that's not how a good consultant works. A good consultant is always who listens to the customer, processes that information, and then comes back with the right solution, right? So you'll have a dedicated session scheduled in your workshop where you will go back and present your solution. This is what we think, how it will take away your pain points. These are your requirements and this is the solution corresponding to these requirements. And business or IT will appreciate your knowledge only once you go back to them in a very structured way. And for any app, for any implementation, right, the core of implementation is the security model. We understand as consultants, being in the Salesforce world, what security model is all about. So role hierarchy, OWD, sharing rules, profiles, permission sets, we understand how it works in Salesforce. But the client or the business with whom you are talking to in these sessions do not understand them. They don't know what OWD is. They don't know what the meaning of profile is. What they know is the personas. So you really need to understand the terminologies over here. What a persona is. Persona is someone, a representation of an end user who will access the application, whether it's an admin, whether it is a sales user, whether it is a sales manager. Every individual, every type of individual is represented as a persona, and how they interact with the system is called a persona journey. You need to really map that out and understand at what point in time they need to access the data, what kind of data they need to access, why do they need to access the data, how will they access the data, right? Through laptops, through mobiles, through tablets, which data they will access, how many objects they need read permissions versus edit permissions, how many objects needs to be shared across these all personas. That's where your sharing requirements will come through. So a consultant mind will always keep the technicalities in their mind, but will ask the right questions so that they get the right level of information out of these discussions, so that they can technically map it to this security model. Okay. And as a best practice, what I follow normally is on day one itself, explain them a bit of sharing model so that it will help them to understand what you're talking in the subsequent sessions. Okay. And explain them in a very layman language, so that don't bring in Salesforce jargons that this is what OWD is, this is what role hierarchy means, right? But try to explain them in a way that they can understand from a business perspective. Then your subsequent discussions, when you're deep diving into detailed requirements, it will be a lot more easier. Come to an alignment on what kind of terminologies you want to use in your discussions forward, right? So if the client is using organizations or companies as accounts, come to an alignment that you will refer accounts as companies or organizations, or you will call it as accounts only, right? So that there is no confusion on what you're referring to, which object. Just a small example, but a very important one, that your terminologies would differ because you're dealing with business and the IT, and you have Salesforce world in your mind. Okay, so applying that knowledge will come later on. First, try to process the information by listening, doing the solutioning in your mind, and then going back with the right solution to them. Similarly for integration requirements or migration requirements, and these requirements become more challenging because here you are talking to people from different technologies, whether it's middleware teams, or whether it's ESB teams, or whether it is SAP teams, Oracle teams, Microsoft teams, whichever technology you want to integrate with, those teams will, they are also technical people, right? So there's always, if you're dealing with architects from different technologies, everybody will have their point of view. So you need to be really having an empathetic approach on how do you deal with those conversations and ensure that what you're getting out of them will serve to deliver your own requirements. Okay. And a good consultant will always be cognizant of the fact that there might be situations where different teams will try to push the work on you, and you might try to push that piece of work on their teams, right? Because you don't want to increase your scope. Similarly, on their side, they will try to do the same, right? A good consultant will always advocate for the right solution, even if it means that you have to take more work or the other team will have to take more work. But what will work in the perspective of the customer, and go and explain to the customer stakeholder that this is what we think as a consultant, this is the right thing to do, and this is what it will take to deliver. Now go and talk to your different teams and see what needs to be done, who needs to take that additional effort, but we think that this is the right thing to do, right? And as part of these workshops, you need to always ensure that you're creating that product backlog so that you can prioritize. Once you're closing out your requirement phase or your design phase, you can prioritize from that backlog that this is what we will go and deliver first. We'll first work on lead management and the accounts and contacts. Then we will look into the opportunity management, right? As a logical sequencing, right? That forms your backlog, and you will basically slot them across different sprints, and that's become your project plan. And obviously you will not be alone in all of doing all of this, but as an individual, if you're aware of all this, then it will be better for you, because then when you're interacting with your technical lead or your project manager or your architects, you are in a better position to understand the large scheme of things and work as a team together. So let's look at how do you go about doing the discovery or doing the solutioning aspect, right? So as I said, first you need to understand their expectation, why that requirement was first documented, what is their pain point that they're really looking to solve for, and to solve that pain point, what are they trying to bring in the change in their system or in their business process or in their IT landscape. Once you understand that, right, only then you can apply your Salesforce knowledge and define the future state. Okay, by future state, how can you implement that requirement and how can you make that requirement into a live application through Salesforce platform. That's where you will apply your technical knowledge on those business requirements. Then you shape the solution, right? Your solution might not be perfect on day one. The way you think in your mind, you need to present out that solution. Client might have their own perspectives to that solution. You do it collaboratively and shape the solution which works best for the customer. Okay, no solution is good or bad to me based on my experience from last 14 years. A good solution is always a solution which works for the end user. You might have done excellent coding, you might have done excellent work in configuring process builder or a flow, or develop the best LWC component, but if the end user cannot use that through the UI or through the user experience, if the adoption levels are not there for that application, all your effort that you have built, let's say in next 6 months, is all going to go in vain, because end user at the end of the day really matters. Adoption of the application really matters. So you have to shape up the overall solution, keeping in the business as well as the IT from the client side, bring them to an alignment, and then shape the solution which works for your end users. Identify the benefits. So let's say if you are implementing a solution, so if there is a requirement where you have more than one solution option, right? You need to really do an analysis. Okay, which one will provide you the most value add, or which one is more easier to configure or easier to build? What is the cost to market? How much time it will take to build each of these options, and which one is a faster and a more efficient solution? What is the benefit that you're going to get for each of the options? If you implement 4 different solutions using each of those options, which solution will work the best, right? That's how you come to an alignment. Okay, out of 4, I will go ahead with this one. Plan for your actions. How are you going to slot it against different sprint cycles? What are the dependencies on that requirement or that solution? And then plan your entire project plan. Present recommendation. As I said, once you have done all of this planning and solutioning in your mind, put it down into a document, a design document or a solution document, and go and present back to your stakeholders. And at the end of the day, requirement gathering workshops ends up with a sign off from the customer that these are the requirements we are going to work on in next 6 months. This is the design that we have agreed upon, and there will not be any change to this agreed detailed requirements that we have gone through in last 2 weeks or 4 weeks, and we sign off on this together that this is what we will deliver, right? This all helps you in your delivery phase when you're doing the actual build or the development, to safeguard yourself on any scope creep or any changes that the client might add additionally. Here's the sample requirement matrix document, which I had used way back in the in my experience. Again, it's a very simplified format and a simple Excel. Every company has their own way of documenting things, right? So always go and refer to what your company uses in your day-to-day projects, right? It could be a simple Excel like this. It could be a application like Jira or a ServiceNow to capture requirements as well. Or it could be an Agile Accelerator. It could be a custom solution built on Salesforce itself to capture all the requirements, right? So you might have different tools, different ways in which you can capture your requirements. Here's a sample of how do you do process modeling. When you're talking about business processes, on the left-hand side, you can see the different personas which I'm dealing with: management and operations, marketing, hunting, customer, farming. These are my different personas who are going to use the application. And how the interaction between different applications, different personas goes from one process step to another process step, that all is depicted in a nice visual flow diagram. And again, we can have multiple tools through which you can come up with these nice diagrams. Visio is there. There are a lot many other tools where you can use to come up with this process flows. This is a swim lane diagram, right? Which basically says that once the customer has interacted with the application, how the flow goes to the marketing team, how the marketing team acts on a particular record, how it will go to the farming team, then the hunting team, right? So it basically gives you a complete picture how the business process is going to interact with the different personas and the applications that you're going to build. A sample architecture diagram, again, the intent here is to understand how Salesforce will interact with all of these applications, what kind of data information will flow from one system to another, okay, and what is your integration approach for each connector that you're going to interact with, right? And this is just a sample diagram. There are blogs by Janice Bott, and there is also Salesforce architect documentation around how should you prepare system architecture diagrams on your own from scratch. Okay, so I'll highly recommend you guys go ahead and Google about it and explore more of that. Okay, but the nutshell, it gives you a pictorial view of what systems exist in the client landscape, what are the systems you're trying to replace, what are the new systems that you're going to implement, and what are the interaction points with various applications, and what is the data flow that is going to happen, what kind of integrations those are. You can be very creative and while indicating the interactions between different systems through connectors or through arrows. You can really depict, okay, whether this integration is going to be in a batch mode or a real mode, what's the frequency of it. You can capture all of that information in one single diagram, okay, and that really represents how creative you are as a person and how good you are as a consultant to put in all of that thought process in one single diagram and represent it to your customer. And this is one of the key areas even for architects who want to present their solutions. You should be good in depicting your system architecture diagrams for your customers, what they have currently versus what they are going to see new, right? As is versus to be architectures are must for any implementation. Let's come to the design phase, right? What do you really do in the design phase? So once you have deep dived into the requirements, once you have agreed on the detailed requirements, you basically go and map it to the technical world of Salesforce. What is going to be my object model? What is going to be my actual processes? How will I solve for those processes, whether it's workflow, process builder, flows, lightning pages, Visualforce, or web components. Security model, what is going to be my OWD for all my objects, sharing rules, if there are any profiles, permission sets, public groups, queues, right? So you come up with all of those solutioning. And if there is a module that is required where there is already an app exchange app, you always go for build versus buy decisions. If let's say the customer has a requirement of generating documents, Excel documents, you might decide, okay, there are applications like Conga, applications like Drawloop, which gives you these document generation capabilities. So you really want to build everything from scratch, or you want to take those applications and use it for your customer, right? So again, as a consultant, you'll have to be in a position where you can recommend which one to use based on your analysis of those app exchange apps, right? And customers will evaluate them on cost factor, on the security factor, on the implementation timeline factor, on how quickly we can use them, what are the benefits involved with using an app exchange app, and so on and so forth. Finalize on the integration pattern. So let's say if there are 10 integrations in your scope, how are you going to implement those integrations? Which patterns you are going to use? Which OAuth mechanism you are going to use? How are you going to authenticate and authorize the end users or any end application who's going to interact with your Salesforce application, right? What is your data migration approach? Do you have a data migration best practices or a strategy document in place? How are you going to do dry runs, multiple dry runs across multiple environments? Which tools and accelerators you're going to use, whether it's an in-house built by your own company or whether it's an app exchange app. And finally, you're going to document all of these into a technical design document or a functional design document. At times, they are both clubbed into one, which might be called as a solution document, right? But at the end of the day, it is about representation of your solution with respect to your requirements that you have gathered and what kind of solution you're going to implement, right? With facts, with assumptions, with decision points, you log everything into that one document. That becomes a basis for your development team to go ahead and develop. Okay. Implementation in phases, right? So here is something which we all deal with, right? We all do the development phase where we do in this circular efforts of interactive design and build sprints. We all know all of this, how sprints are executed, what is a scrum call, daily stand-up calls, sprint demos, right? Code coverage we need to take care of, deployments we need to do, right? But there are a lot many other things which goes on in parallel, which a project management team or a project manager needs to take care of, right? So in parallel, the testing team needs to prepare the test scenario so that when you deliver the sprint, they are ready to do the test scripts, execute their test scripts, and come up with the bugs, right? There is a parallel training team who's already preparing the training content based on what you are building in your sprints. They'll take screenshots. They will ensure that they prepare nice PDF, PPT documents for their final training sessions. Then there is data integration team. There is data migration team who is working in the background on different systems, trying to understand which are the source systems, which are the target systems, what are the field mappings to be done, how data will come together, how will you deploy, what kind of support you need, right? Then there is project management phase, which basically takes care of the entire team, their well-being. If the team needs to go for a dinner or a lunch party, if the team needs to work over a weekend, if a team needs to go for a how they are going to deliver as one collaborative team, right? All of these the project manager needs to take care of, right? So, and one more thing that they need to take care of is any change of scope, right? So there's a continuous change management process which goes on based on how your sprints are progressing, right? So next time when you think about a project, don't just think about your own self of delivering that project from a user story standpoint. You have to understand that there are around 50 other things which are going around the project. And is it important for you to really understand all of this? You might ask, okay, why should I understand all this, right? It helps you in increasing your maturity about the overall process. It helps you in developing an empathetic approach towards each other in the team, and it will help you to develop that mindset that we work together as a team. Okay, and with that mindset, when you interact with your customers, it will reflect in your nature, it will reflect in your conversations, that you understand not just the development piece, but you understand the overall gamut of things that goes around in a project delivery. Okay, and that is where, see, these are not our jobs, right, as technical people, but if we understand what other person has to do as well, it gives that flavor when we are conversing, that we take care of other people as well, people with whom we work on a day-to-day basis. And that really brings the overall mindset of a consultant, that you have that empathetic nature, you have that listening skills, you have the skills to ask the right questions, and you have the ability to articulate. And this maturity and the exposure that you are getting through this, it will help you in your skills as well. Now, user stories, right? Now this is typically related to the functional people or the BAs in the team, right, who has to configure or document a user story. Just a format over here, we all have worked on user stories in our respective projects. For those who have not, simple template to write a user story is, as a persona, as a stakeholder, or as an individual who's going to use my system, he wants to do so and so things, so that so and so things are met. Okay, anytime a user story will be in a context of a persona, that they want to do some things in the system so that they can derive some benefit or an output of that system. Okay, what kind of tools you use, what kind of estimates you do for a user story, and what kind of capacity or utilization you talk about for a user. So let's say user story takes about, let's say, 3 story points. How many hours that translates into? How many people do you need to deliver that user story, right? So that is whole game of capacity versus utilization. Now, I'm not sure how many of you are like real project managers over here, but if you ever get into those steps or into those career levels in future, right, you'll always have to take care how much your team is working within a sprint. If you have 5 people in your team, you have 40 hours per week for one person, or 45 hours to work for one person in a week. You have 5 people, so you have, let's say, 200 hours of work you can deliver in 1 week, right? A sprint is typically of 2 to 4 weeks. So let's say if it is of a 2-week sprint, you have around 400 hours of work that you can deliver, right? Simple math. Okay, how much the team can deliver sprint by sprint is called the team velocity of the team. It indicates how the team will progress sprint by sprint as they deliver the project work. There are some other nuances around burn down charts and burnt up charts. Burn down charts are nothing but how much the team has left to be delivered in a sprint cycle. So let's say if a sprint begins on Monday and ends on a after 2 weeks on a Friday, if I have to take a burn down chart by let's say Thursday, I've already done the work for first 4 days. I have to see how much work is left for the next 6 days, right? Next 6 working day, how many user stories or how many story points I will be able to deliver. That is my burn down chart. Versus burnt up is how much work I've done in 4 weeks and what is the total left amount work, overall work, right? So burnt up is basically how much you have done, and burn down is how much is pending with respect to the total work that you're going to deliver in a sprint, right? Now again, you might say that this is all doesn't relate to me, but these are all good things to know because you world in this industry, and agile is the everybody talks about agile, but we don't really understand the agile concepts. And these are some of the things which we as a consultant should be aware, because when you will talk to your customer, and if your customer have these queries, how much work the team is doing, these are the terms which will come up, and if you're not aware of it, then you'll not be able to explain those things to your customer. Build sprint cycle, again, it begins with the sprint scope, how much you're going to deliver in 2 weeks or 4 weeks based on your sprint timelines. At the start of the sprint, you always have like say X number of user stories assigned to that sprint. You need to understand what is the feasibility of delivering those stories within that sprint, right? At times there are user stories which are complex, which cannot be delivered in one sprint. You need to go for a staggered approach where you deliver that user story in, let's say, 3 sprints versus 1 sprint. What are the best practices in delivering a sprint? Unit testing, right? Again, how do you, or what is your approach of developing test classes? Do you do it after the UAT is done, or do you do it after every sprint, or do you do it on a day-to-day basis as soon as you develop your code, right? Always go for the best practice. As soon as you have developed a piece of code, you should always go for developing your test classes. Unit testing is often ignored because we don't understand the overall context of what the business requirements we have implemented for a given user story, right? Nobody asks the question. When a user story is given to you, when a technical solution is given to you as developers or as admins, we just go ahead with the development without really understanding. If the user story talks about a persona X, what does that persona do? Why is that persona using my system? If the persona uses my user story which I have developed, right, what is the benefit that the user is going to get? Is there any dependency of this user story with any other user story? You need to ask those questions to yourself. The consulting mindset which I'm talking about here is about asking the right questions. And as developers, we can ask all of these questions to our tech leads, to our senior developers, to our co-developers, right? With the sole reason that once you understand all of these answers, you can develop things better. Okay, a consulting mindset is a continuous evolution or a continuous process of bettering yourself on a day-to-day basis, or bettering yourself on a week by week or a month by month basis. I leave it up to you how you want to measure yourself or how you want to track your progress, but this is what really comes at the crux of it. Have a patience of listening, understanding, absorbing, ask the right questions, get clarity, and then work on it. This way it will help you a lot. Learn to say no, right? And this is a big thing which I have observed, and many people have spoken about it, right? But it's a very hard thing to say no to a customer, or say no to a technical lead or an architect or a project manager. When they give us a thing to deliver, or a user story to deliver, we always say yes, right? The yes culture begins from the top and it comes down, right? And at times you are not at fault, but the habit of saying yes lands you up in a problem, right? So wherever possible, if you are in a client facing role, if you have the right authority to say no, please say no. And if you think it would work in the best interest of the customer, don't say no just because you're going to end up having more work. You can still say no, but with the right facts that, okay, this is my capacity, this much amount of work I can deliver in 2 weeks, and you're asking me for delivering more amount of work, and this cannot be done. You can say no only if you have facts, only if you have valid justifications, if you have documentation around it. Unless and until you cannot back it up with facts, documentation, or justification, you cannot say no convincingly to your customers or to anyone, whoever is talking to you, right? So always develop that habit of acquiring or gathering those facts, relevant documentation, understanding it, and then going back to the customer or anyone and convincingly putting your point forward that these are the reasons why I'm saying no. And for me, client delivery or the best interest of the end user always is paramount, right? So that's the key skill that you need to develop as a consultant as well, that at times you will have to say no. Okay, and if you can start working on it from today, it will help you in your long run as well. Build versus buy, I think we have covered this, right? Change request versus issues. Normally what happens during the testing cycle is there is always a debate on whether that issue that has been found by the customer, is it a bug or is it a new change request, right? And there are a lot of debates around it in all the projects, right? Again, how do you convince the customer that it is a change request versus a bug is through a strong documentation. If you have not documented your initial scope or your initial design in a good way, you will never able to convince back to the customer that it is a change request and it was not agreed upon, right? So the only way that you can justify all of that is through documentation. Through now documentation, it could be meeting notes, it could be Excel documents, it could be Word documents, PPTs, anything, right? But ensure that you focus, give the right respect or the right importance to your project documentation as well. Development tools, I'm not going to deep dive on it. CI/CD tools, again, it's part of the DevOps process. Every company has its own strategies around how to go about DevOps process in a specific project. I'll take this slide in the Q&A section. If you have any scenario that you're facing in your day-to-day projects, if you're facing challenge, not from a solution standpoint, but as individual, as a person, if you're facing challenge to deal with the scenario, we can hear those things out, and I can probably guide you from my experience on if I were to be in your position, how I would have handled that situation, right? So let's look at that once we get to the Q&A section. Now the whole validation phase, right, where you do the integration testing, where you do the actual UAT with your end customers, right? Some of the things that are important in this phase is the right documentation. As I said, there could be, for customers, everything is a bug. Everything which has been which was agreed scope or agreed requirement during the start of the project, and if you have not delivered according to that, everything is a bug for them, right? So you need to really document all of your scenarios that you're going to test. What are the steps that you're taking to test those scenarios, test scripts, and if you have found a bug, what is that bug, what is the root cause of that bug? You need to keep all of that documented so that when you go to the UAT or the final testing phase, you have all those supporting documents, right? And once the issue comes, how do you track those issues, how do you triage them, and how do you find the root cause, assign it to the right team? All of those things matter. Effective change management, as I said in my last session as well, change management is it's a very tedious, complex, and a very important chapter to the overall project delivery, right? If you don't have a good governance around it, if you don't have a good strategy around it, you will always end up in project delivery issues within your companies, right? So when you are working on projects, always understand how your projects are handling change requests. Okay, that will give you a different perspective of how do you take CRs or enhancements from your customers, and how do you deliver them. And then you can obviously link it to your overall project life cycle, that for change request, what is your dev strategy, in which org you develop, in which org you deploy, how the testing happens, how it is deployed to the final production. And that's where your DevOps process will also kicks in, right? So if you have one path or one branch for your normal development, scratch implementations versus new CRs that will come up, right? So how the overall environment management or the release management thing is handled through DevOps process is a really interesting area where you can explore more and gain more exposure on. All right. So the final thing is UAT and training. One small incident which I can share is UAT. Everybody understands, right? Is basically user acceptance testing with the stakeholders from the business side who will come and validate your solution. Okay. And you need to plan for those UAT sessions. You need to plan for the communication to your stakeholders, and you need to have a go no go decision at the end of the UAT. Okay. And your developers are always on top of their toes to resolve any bugs on a day-to-day basis which comes out through the UAT, and go for a quick resolution so that you can solve it immediately and the users can retest it, because the go no go decision is based upon how many bugs, open bugs you have. Is there any critical bug from that list? Is there something which will stop the production deployment based on the UAT findings, right? Let me share one incident which has happened to me in my previous firm or previous experience. I was in charge of a project delivery and I was at the client side. I went through all the phases in a very good way. UAT happened in a conference room. Every user said, no, everything is looking good. We had few issues, we resolved them and everything was looking good. Okay. We got the thumbs up. We went for the deployment. We went for the go live. Okay. Everything is green. We had email exchanges with the entire team. Congratulations on the go live and blah, 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 blah. And on the second day after going live, there is an email from the business head of the client side that we are stopping the usage of the system because people are not able to use it. And I was like, we've just completed the UAT few weeks back, and what is the issue, right? And because I was at the client location, I really went up to that team. It was kind of a service cloud application, and the challenging part was that we had created a case form which used to take the user at least a minute to fill in and save it, right? And the call volume for these service agents was very high. Okay. And they were using a couple of other systems along with the Salesforce application to find the information for that case based on the query that they used to get, and fill in all of that information in a case and submit it. Okay. Now, because the case form was lengthy and they had to do all of these other system search and all of that, right? It used to take them at least good amount of 3-4 minutes to work on one case and log that case. And there was a long queue on the other side and people were frustrated and they were like, we can't use this, and we stopped the usage of this application. I was like, okay, fine. So what was the lesson learned out of this? Okay. And when I went to the root cause of it, it seemed like 80% of their cases were just inquiry cases, which didn't require them to fill in all the information that we had asked for. Okay, again, the design and everything was agreed by the customer initially, but they also didn't envision the actual day-to-day life of a user agent, and we also missed doing that, right? So the the lesson here is, when you're doing UAT, try to be as real as your end user of how they are going to use the system in your day-to-day life. That's how the UAT should be conducted. Okay, and that's being a big lesson for me. We normally do UATs over working sessions or over a specific period, but try to bring in the actual users who can replicate their day-to-day scenario and give you a thumbs up. Okay, and in our case also we had actual users, but they were not at their desk. They were in a conference room and testing. So all the other application that they had to search for were not there during the UAT process. When they actually got the production system access doing their day-to-day job, that's when they realized that it is so much difficult to fill in all the information on a real time when they're, let's say, receiving around 5 calls per minute, right? So one lesson learned: always be realistic of what kind of user testing you're doing or user acceptance testing you're doing. Train the trainer sessions. I've been fortunate enough to do that global training for the super users, 50 users across the globe, from different business units, from different countries, from different cultures. I've got users who were not comfortable even using Excel. Simple copy paste, which we as technical people do it on a day-to-day basis, they were facing challenges even in using a simple copy paste function in a Excel file, right? For them, Salesforce world would be an alien world, right? I remember one super user telling me that you are so fast, you are lightning fast because you are just navigating from one screen to another during the training session, and we are not following anything, right? So you need to really understand your user base, whom you are training, what is their, how much tech savvy they are. Some users are like younger people, they are very tech savvy, they understand the Salesforce world, and they'll have advanced queries. How do you configure this? How do you configure a pick list? Tell me that. How, if I want to change this, how can I do this by myself, right? And that's where you need to really be, as a consultant, you need to be, you need to have situational awareness to handle both kinds of people, right? One set who will not be that tech savvy, who will not understand whatever you're telling, and there are cultural parameters as well, there are language barriers as well. I may not be that good in English, they might be German speaking people, French speaking people, they might be someone from Africa, someone from China, right? So you really need to understand how much they are grasping, because train the trainer sessions is all about training the super users, and they are going to be the people who are responsible to train their actual users. So if they don't understand the application well, your end users will not understand the application well. The net result is the adoption will be low and your application is not a success, right? Though you might have done the best implementation, but the users are not using your application, and thumbs down from the entire client side that you have not delivered what you have signed up for. Deployments, again, various approaches we all know, change sets, and with various DevOps tools coming into play, there are different DevOps approaches to doing the deployments, test class validation. When you deploy from one environment to another, what kind of test classes you need to run, right? All of those nuances are there, but you need to plan in advance for each of the deployment. One important aspect which we as developers don't get exposure to is the final cutover plan. Okay, when you do a cutover, you need to understand that what is the window of that deployment into production. And when you're doing something in production directly, you need to understand, are there any live users in your production? Will there be any impact to the business? Typically, if there are any live production users who are using the application, the client would want you to deploy everything over a weekend or on a Friday night, right? So that Monday morning when the users log in, they will have everything upgraded, right? So small things here to be taken note of. You need to come up with a cutover plan, communication plan, so that all your stakeholders are informed. If there is any issues during the deployment, you need to have a rollback plan. You need to ensure that the business users are lined up for Monday morning to do a sanity check before you open up the system for all the users, right? So all these are step-by-step approaches through which you can handle a cutover plan, and reach out to your experienced folks within your company who normally work on these cutover plans, right? If there is a release team, they would have the access to the cutover plan. Again, as a person, you need to understand that how these things are done. You may or may not get a chance to do it by yourself on your projects, but having that know-how of how things work will really help you when you are in a client facing role. Communication approach is very important, and you really need to understand how communications are sent out and what kind of detailing that goes into it. Support projects, again, everybody hates support projects. People don't like to work on support projects versus implementation projects. Again, few nuances here are, support project also offers lot of learning opportunities if you really think from a perspective that support is something where a system is live and you're trying to bring in additional changes to that live system, right? And an implementation project is, there is nothing in production, it is scratch environment, no one is there. Whatever you're going to build in an implementation phase and whatever you're going to do to deploy for the first time, that's where the system will be, the users will use the system for the first time. It has its own challenges. Implementation timelines are aggressive at times versus operate or support projects, and support projects have its own complexities because you are trying to push in a code into a live system where your users might get impacted. You need to focus more on regression testing. You need to focus more on environment strategy, deployment strategy. How are you taking care of those hot fixes versus smaller releases versus major enhancements that goes into the production, right? So you need to take care of all of this when your support projects, and it has its own set of learnings which you should explore as well, or try to understand if you don't still like to work on it. Documentation and change management, I've been talking about this enough, right? At each step of the project lifecycle, you need to focus on documenting the right things so that you can use that documentation when the project is in red, or where there is a debate or an argument with a customer over a scope, over a specific module, or over a issue or a bug versus a change request, right? So all of these documents that I have used across my experience, I have listed them over here. Feel free to refer them and try to relate to your projects whether you maintain these documentation or not. If yes, go through those documentation so that you get that exposure what these documents contain, and also take a shot at creating those documents by your own for your own projects, right? There is one thing to read and there is one thing to create it by your own self. There's a whole lot of difference, because when you create something by your own, you get the granular details. Okay, what should I really write in these documents, versus reading somebody else's document. It is far more easier. Communication and teamwork, right? And any project cannot be delivered without the right communication and without the right teamwork. As I've been saying, have an empathetic approach, try to understand each other more, try to understand each other's roles so that you can work together as a team. With that, let's move into the communication chapter of this session. Let me do a quick time check. I think we are doing good on the time. So forms of communication, right? What are the different forms of communication that we normally use? Verbal. When I say verbal, your team meetings, your phone calls, Zoom meetings, all of that comes under the verbal communication, right? Written communication, where you write emails, or you take down meeting notes, or you do all the documentation, that is all written communication. There is also two more form of communication. One is non-verbal communication, how you interact with the customer or how you interact with your stakeholders. That also is important, right? Your expressions, your hand movements, your sitting posture, your listening capabilities, that also is form of communication. Other mode is the visual communication. How do you express yourself, your facial expressions, your eye movements when you're interacting with a customer in person, right? All of those again matters, and you have to act in a very professional way when you are dealing with your clients in a professional environment. Some slides here around the best practices of email and the verbal communication, and some of the challenges which I have seen in project teams working across last decade into the Salesforce ecosystem, right? What are the best practices? Always ensure that your email subject is very clear. If I receive an email, I will only open that email if the subject makes sense to me. Okay. If you want to discuss something else and if your subject is very gibberish or not clear, people will not open your email and read through. Okay. The from address, this is typically important when you're interacting with your clients. Ensure that your from address, I mean, one-on-one interaction doesn't really matter, but when you're sending emails from your application, right? The sender compliance is one area where you need to focus on, because this typically happens in your marketing cloud applications or applications where you want to send email outside from Salesforce. Your from address should not reflect as, let's say, it should come from a company domain, let's say abc.com versus no reply @salesforce.com, right? So sender compliance is a very specific feature which you should keep in mind during implementations, but ensure that your from address is sender compliant. Otherwise, it will end up in a junk folder or in the spam folders of your intended recipients. Always include the signature in your emails. I've seen emails coming in from practitioners or from people within the teams without having their phone numbers, without having their proper designation or proper company name listed under their signatures. It's a best practice, not a mandatory one, but if you're writing people with whom you have never interacted, with whom you have never had a phone call, right? Your signature speaks a lot about you and it represents you on an email. So always have that formal etiquettes of including your signature on your emails which goes out to external audience. Be mindful of whom to add in the to CC and BCC. Again, when we get these celebration emails or go live announcements, right? There are like 500 people in an email and we tend to do reply all, right? Always be mindful of that you're spamming someone else's mailbox when you're doing a reply all to 500 people, right? And when you're sending out emails to customers or your clients directly, always be mindful of who is in the to box, who is in the CC box, who is in the BCC, right? BCC will not normally use it unless you are trying to send some information to someone in a confidential manner. But to and BCC, to and CC box are really important, and be mindful of when to use where. Always read your email before hitting that send button, because at times what happens is, and I've seen this and if I practice it myself, that if I'm in anger, if I am trying to have a heated argument or an argument with someone with whom I don't agree on, right? I will just put out some lines of email and try to push it through, right? Normally, when you're hyper or when you are in a not in a good mood, you tend to put your brain or your thoughts in an email, but then put it in a draft state and then revisit that email once you are cooled down or once your mind is in the right place, and always read out the content twice before you send it out. Okay, and especially when you're sending out to this leadership, project leadership, practice leadership, or your client stakeholders, if you're writing a mail to the client business heads or the C level executives, always keep it as a best practice that you read your email content, ensure everything is in the right place, right usage of words, straight to the point, structured email versus unstructured email. All these things needs attention before you hit the send button. Use punctuations properly. Again, these are all like textbook things, but we tend to ignore or overlook them, right? Do not disclose confidential information when you're sharing any email to an external person. Okay, be mindful of what you're sharing over an email with an external person, whether it is something confidential or not. And these days when we are all working remotely, this confidentiality things becomes that more important, because knowingly unknowingly we might share information, personal information about, let's say if you're sharing a data migration file with the external people, right? The file might contain personal information about all the contacts within a company which you might not be aware of, and you just send it across. Okay, to let's say another team who's working on the same project, they should not be accessing the personal information about your client data, right? So small nuances here and there, but very important ones. When you get an email within your mailbox, and if you are addressed in that email, always make sure that you are responding to those emails within 36 to 48 hours. If you're going on a long vacation, always ensure you put the out of office emailer, so that the person who has sent you an email with an action item will understand that you're not going to respond back to them by so and so date, right? And I always make it a point that my mailbox is cleared every day. When I log off, I don't have a single email unread in my mailbox. That's a best practice which I follow personally. Introduce yourself. If you're writing mail to someone for the first time, they might not know you, right? You might be a rock star in your company, but not a rock star everywhere. So take 2 minutes to, or 2 lines to introduce yourself, who you are, what kind of role you play on the project, why are you writing this email to them, and give them some context before you deep dive into the actual content. Only discuss matters related to your company or related to your project which are in public. Do not discuss anything which should not be there in that public email, because emails are also official content. It represents you, it represents your company from where you're sending those emails. Be mindful when you're interacting within the team or within the project, right? When to send an email versus when to have a one-on-one discussion. If you do not agree with your teammates, if you do not agree with your project leadership, don't just shoot out an email first. Have that one-on-one conversation. Try to clear it out between yourselves before you put it an official word through an email, right? Clear and to the point messaging. This is very important, and I would advise everyone to look for structured versus unstructured email analogy in Google. You will get context about what I'm trying to convey here. Always ensure that your email is structured in such a way that your messaging is very clear, straight to the point, and you're not writing paragraphs and paragraphs of information in an email. Nobody likes to read a book within an email, right? So always keep it to the point, always be very clear, clearly call out the action items, If there is information to be shared, share them in form of a bullet point so that people can find it easier to read through. Know who you are sending those emails to, right? Who is your target audience? Is it leadership? Is it project team? Is it client people whom you have never interacted with it? Understand who is your audience and accordingly draft your email. And if it is documented, it represents you as an individual, it represents your company because you work for a company, right? So it's a brand value at stake. So be mindful of all of those things. Some housekeeping items: avoid one-liners, right? I've seen a lot of people writing one-liners when sending out a reply or a response to an email. Address the person with whom you're communicating and ensure, even if it is a one-line response, address that person first and then drop your one-liner, right? Always ensure you have out of office if you're going for long vacations or holidays. Avoid using slang languages. It's an official documentation. If it's an official communication through an email, avoid using any shortcuts or short words. Keep it very clean and clear. Avoid large attachments. If a email attachment is of very high file size, then put it on a shared folder where you can share the link with the recipients rather than pushing that as an attachment, so that if there are like 50 people in your email, only 5 people needs to look at the document. They will download that document on their side and view the document if you share it over a link, versus if you attach it to an email, all the 50 people will have to download the document because your mail clients, whichever mail client they are using, will enforce the downloading part on their mailbox so that they can see the document, right? So avoid all of that when you are dealing with email communication. Common challenges when I've seen in team meetings is silence is the best defense, right? And in Zoom meetings these days, you would have seen this more obvious. If there is a daily stand-up or a team meeting or a client meeting, 80% of the team members are always silent. Only there are 10 or 20% people on the call who are talking through the full hour, right? Because people feel that silence is the best defense, they will be very hesitant in voicing themselves out. And communication is something which will come through practice, right? So if there is an action item on you, if you have to provide your updates, be vocal about it. Don't be in a shell and don't keep those pointers to yourself. If there is any other point going on and if you think you have a viewpoint on it, unmute yourself and talk through it. Okay. There are also reservations which I've heard, that people say that, okay, I have a state dialect, I come from South India or North India and I have a heavy mother tongue influence in way I speak, right? Or let's say I prefer speaking in Hindi versus English, right? Again, it's not necessary that if you're fluent in English, only then you're a good communicator, right? Simple choice of words, if you can articulate in a way that the person with whom you're talking to can understand your thought process, that is good communication to me, right? And obviously when you're interacting with your customers, English is the default language, but then ensure that you're not pressurizing yourself or your mind that you need to learn English or learn how to speak in English, rather than focus on how can I represent myself in a simpler choice of words, so that the person with whom I'm talking to or whom I'm writing to can understand my thought process, right? Learn to say no, be assertive, represent it with the right facts, right documentation, right justification when you're saying no. Just don't say bluntly no, because people will not appreciate if you're just saying no without any reasoning or facts. Uncomfortable in introducing yourself, and this I've seen in most of my team meetings where we ask people to introduce themselves, right? I am so and so, I work for so and so company for so and so years, I do this, right? Always work on how are you going to introduce yourself in your team meeting or in a client discussion, right? Write it down. If you don't have habit of introducing yourself, write it down. How will you introduce yourself in 30 seconds to an unknown person, and practice over it, because that will help you represent yourself and represent your company in a better way in front of these unknown peoples. People are normally silent because they are unsure of what to talk to. If you're not closer to the actual content that is being discussed, if you're not confident about your knowledge that you're trying to communicate, you will always prefer to be quiet in a team discussion or in a client discussion. So that's where gain more knowledge so that you understand the content which is being discussed and you can speak through it whenever there is an opportunity. Conscious of what others will think if I speak on something, right? If your integration topic is being discussed and your architects are talking and you are a developer, you want to share your opinion, right? You will always have that reservation whether the architects will take your viewpoint seriously or not, whether I should talk now or whether I should talk to my architect in an offline manner, right? Again, it all comes up with the level of confidence you have in your knowledge. And if you think the point is right, always go ahead and share your viewpoint, because the way I see it is, in a conversation, either you learn or either you make the other person understand your viewpoint in a very clear way. Either you learn or that other person learns based on whichever viewpoint is the correct one, right? And talk with conviction. Always present yourself with a lot of conviction that you know the subject and you know what you're talking about, right? And that confidence will only come if you gain more knowledge, if you practice more about talking about those concepts or talking more about those topics. Today I'm here from last 3 sessions. If I've considered the time, I've spoken almost 6 hours, right? Every session 2 hours continuously on this entire topic, because I know the subject which I'm talking about, right? And I can be very fluent. I don't have to prepare myself on these topics because I know what I'm talking about, and with a lot of conviction I can say. Daily team meetings, right? So this is again a challenge which I've seen, is only one person talking, rest of the team members are all in a listening mode. I would highly encourage that when you are representing yourself in a team meeting, be vocal about what you want to say. Don't join any team meetings where you just have to say hi and then bye, right? If you don't have a active contribution into a meeting, I would say don't join those meetings. Again, it's my personal advice which I tend to follow. There are certain leadership meetings where you have to join and we have to do the high and buy stuff, but value your time is what I want to convey through this. Value your own time, and with that you will understand people will start respecting your time as well. And in this pandemic situation, it is more important that how you value yourself. Multitasking while on meetings, while I'm on meeting I'm doing something else. So today in this conversation, I don't know how many of you are cutting vegetables in the side, or how many of you are playing games on your mobile, right? And the challenging part why people tend to multitasking is because the speaker who's talking is not engaging enough, or the topic is not relevant to you that you want to focus on that meeting, right? So always join meetings where you think you will have to give your 100% focus on. Today if you have joined this session, I'm assuming that you are interested in this topic and that's why you are here, right? And you're all listening to me. And if I'm not doing a good job here today, you are all doing multitasking, you're doing your own stuff because you don't find those topics relevant to you. Okay, not sure what to talk. Again, it's all about the subject, the content. If you're not sure about what to talk, then you will always have that less confidence. You'll always be shy of talking, and you'll always be conscious of what others will think if I say something. Here are some of the references on the communication aspect, right? You can go through these links, and with that I'll call it up for today's session and the overall D2C series. Thank you for being a lovely audience, and we have wrapped it up in dot time. Okay, I'm happy to take up any questions if there are any, and then we can have a small round of Kahoot, which is our formality or a ritual, I would say, not a formality, so that you can all on the Udemy course, which is being sponsored by one of our community member, so that you can deep dive into sharing and visibility designer learning and take advantage of that. With that, I'll hand it over to Sachin if you have any questions which you can ask.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thanks, Rupesh, for sharing these knowledge with us. And guys, please put your questions in the chat window so that Rupesh will answer those questions. After that, we will play Kahoot. Yeah, people has put it the questions over there. Rupesh, if you can see the chat window,
Yeah,
there are
I'm just going through it.
so many questions people has put it over there.
How to decide if going for application like for Conga for support after implementation? So it's Ankit, it really depends upon your business requirements, right? Conga is typically used for document generation. There are a lot of other applications in the market, right, which works best for your requirements. You'll have to probably will have to do a POC, or if there are any projects within your company who have done similar implementations, or if you have not done, you'll have to might have to end up doing a POC to justify to your customer that this is the right solution for you, right? And it varies customer by customer, company by company on how you want to deal with it. Who owns solution design? Solution design is owned by the implementation team, and the owner of that solution design should be the architect who is designing the solution for your team, and the architect should own up the overall solution. On who owns the actual document, I mean, typically it's a mixed bag. Anyone from within the team can take a stab at the documentation. Normally functional people start off with the documentation, technical people contribute to it, right? But it's a very ambiguous kind of a scenario where you don't have a one person owning that document in a team environment, right? Normally within the team they identify the most junior person and just give it to them to write everything, right? Because people think that it's not their job to document something. But from my experience, if you take up that opportunity of writing a document, you will learn a whole lot of things which you would not have think through when reading through the document. So that's why I said that if you get an opportunity to document something, go for it, because it will give you the exposure which you have which you would have never thought of. Who is responsible for change requests versus bugs? In testing, tester finds the bug, but developer said it is not in requirement, so it is due to missed design phase or client requirement. So your Bible for tester or developer is the scope document, right? It's the design document or the requirement where it's with Jira or user story or wherever the requirement is captured, right? Now what happens in the ambiguous scenarios is that the requirement is not detailed enough, right? So that's where you go back to your functional team or your business analyst and ask them to clarify with your client stakeholders. They come back and say that, okay, this is an issue or this is a change request, right? And then you align across all the teams and agree upon that whether it is a bug or it is a change request. Okay, I see this fight. It's an epic fight, historically proven that developers and testers don't go hand in hand, because to testers it is a bug, and for developers it is never a scope. It's never a requirement, right? So that's a classic case, and the whole decisioning of which way it will go depends upon how functional team has documented the user stories in the first place. And if the documentation is not very clear, then you have to go back to the client and seek those clarities. Yeah, and as Vikram has said, I mean, typically when you go into a sprint cycle, right, functional team will go through the grooming of the stories. Well, they will try to detail out each and every user story, each and every requirement, what is the acceptance criteria for each user story, right? And tester also, the test lead and some of the senior QAs will also have a job at hand to go through the scenarios or the user stories and come up with test scenarios and test scripts. And at a certain point in time, your dev leads or tech leads on the project and the test lead needs to be in alignment with respect to what is going to get tested and what are the scenarios that are going to be tested and what are the outcomes, right? If any individual has not done their job in a right way, you tend to end up in those conversations, arguments, heated discussions. All of that happens, and that's part and parcel of any project, right? You cannot really avoid everything, but what you can do is you can follow the right documentation, do the right thing to minimize those conversations. Tester, apart from attending and grooming the session, always refer to the acceptance criteria. Yes. Very good session. Could we get a copy of this PPT? Is consultant role same as? So for PPT, I'm not sharing the deck as such, but you always will get hands to the recordings of these sessions. So feel free to attend them, go through the specific slides which I've been talking about in all of my sessions. And if you have any questions on that, I'll be sharing my email ID where you can reach out to me with any queries if you have. Consultant role is not same as business analyst, though there is a far more overlap, right? Business analyst to me is a title, and consultant is also a different title. Okay, consultant is someone who can play the technical role as well. Okay, it's a very ambiguous scenario, to be honest. In an industry, these terminologies are used very interchangeably. Okay, business analyst is someone who will directly work with the business and try to capture requirements for you, whereas a consultant will go a step ahead than that. So obviously their job is to coordinate and interact with the business stakeholders, but here the consultant will go step ahead and interact with every stakeholder which is there. They will coordinate with the development team, they will coordinate with the client team, they can also be in a position to propose a solution if the person is technical enough, and they act as a trusted advisor. So if a client is facing any problem, they will always go to this consultant with their problem statement and say, okay, what do you advise me to do, right? That's typically a consultant role. Okay, and in our world or in our industry, yes, these are all loosely termed, loosely used terms, and very used very interchangeably. So that's where there's a lot of ambiguity on which role fits in where, right? But that's typically how, on a paper book or ideal world, the difference between a business analyst versus a consultant role would be. Yeah, links I can share with this with the organizers of this group, and they can share it over email with you all. Nurse is business analyst and doctor is a consultant. Good analogy, Vikram. BA is more functional, consultant could be techno functional. Again, it depends upon a person's skill set, right? You can find consultant who are just doing functional coordination, but they are not restricted to just requirement gathering. Okay, they might also be people who can do configuration, right? They might also be people who can interact with any other teammates team also. If there is a multi-team engagement, they might also be responsible for giving functional demos, sprint demos. They might also be people who can interact with the app exchange teams to work on different options which might work for the customer, right? So there's a very high overlap between what these two people can do. Nobody goes by the textbook. It really varies by an individual skill set. A BA, if that person is technical enough, if the person knows Salesforce enough, they might also go and end up doing solutioning, right? So these can be used interchangeably as well, based on how the individual is representing themselves. All right. Any more questions, guys?
Thank you, Rupesh sir, like for answering those questions. There is one more announcement which I want to do before that Kahoot session. So I will urge to each and every one, guys who have win in the Kahoot participant on our previous sessions, please take a chance to another one, like to come forward and win the and take the leverage of that sharing and visibility course which was provided by Walid Al-Hor. So that's the main announcement which I want to do over there. And please do post over Twitter and LinkedIn. Go ahead, Rupesh.
Okay, so guys, here is where you can reach me, right? So you can either DM me on my Twitter handle, or you can write me on this Gmail box, which is developer to consultant. I normally take time over weekends to respond to each and every email that comes to this mailbox. And if it requires for a one-on-one call, I would definitely propose that to you in my response, that we should talk over a phone call rather than just exchanging emails, right? So based on the nature of the query, I tend to respond to that. All right, so we are all excited to play the Kahoot. All right, let me stop sharing and share my entire screen so that all right, everyone can see my screen.
Yes, we can see.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is your pin. Go to this www.kahoot.it and enter this game pin. Ensure that your names are real names and you're not putting any fake names, because the organizers need to send out the vouchers to you. So that enter the right email address, enter the right names, so that we know who's the winner. All right, we have 33 people. I'm expecting at least 27, 28 to join. One more minute and then we can get started. All right, anyone else remaining? Cool. I see we have got stable number 24. Let's get started, guys. So first one is a multi-select traits of a consultant. If you have been following my series, you will know this answer very easily. It's a multi-select. Okay. Let's see who's on the top. Saranya, Vigneshwaran, Sesha are on the top. Sesha and Vikrame are having tie. Let's move to the next one. How many phases are there in a project life cycle? It's a twister one, right? Because just a hint, not everything which I showed in my slide was qualifying for a project life cycle phase, right? So
It's actually a tricky question. I think so.
yes, yes, 7. If you recollect, I called out that data migration is an activity and it's not a phase. So 7 is the answer. And let's move to the next, see who is on the top. So Sesha, well done. And Ketan are in the game. Saranya is on the third position. Let's see what's next. What are the outcome of a requirement gathering session? It's a simpler one. Okay. Yes, all of the above. You basically come up with a security model, data model, process flows, and so Ketan is on the top. Sesha drops to third. Daniel is the highest climber. Great job, guys. Let's see. Saranya Bakap, what's a typical Scrum duration? Read it as sprint, guys. What is a typical sprint duration? Again, it's a trickier one because projects might follow their own cycle, but I'm asking for a typical one, which where most of the projects would follow. Yes, 2 to 4 weeks. That's the right one. Let's see who all are there in the top 3. Vivek, Vikram, and Ketan. All right, we'll have some simpler ones coming up. What defines a team velocity? This is the toughest one, I would believe. If anyone has not worked in a agile projects, or even if you're working, you might not have heard about this term called velocity.
Agreed.
Yes, it's a. I briefly touched upon it during my session today. It's about measuring the sprint progress, sprint by sprint, for the entire team. Let's see what's the change. So Divya climbs up. Sesha and Saranya, you guys were in the top 3. You have dropped off now. Fuck up, guys. So this is a puzzle. You need to arrange the project phases in a sequential order. I have more time for this because you have to arrange stuff, right, on your end. And this is a unique question because nobody, I think, in Kahoot world has tried this ever before, arranging the options.
Yes, I'm seeing this first time in my experience.
Yes, same with us. We have arranged lot of sessions, lot of sessions till now, but we never use this type of question. But definitely we will try to use this in our upcoming sessions as well.
Yeah. Yes, this is actually cool. I like that one. Like to arranging the things.
All right, cool. 33%. The correct order is discovery, build, UAT, and hypercare, right? So I don't know what it indicates. 67% got it right and 33% got it wrong. That's what it says. All right. Lot of dynamic up and down on the leaderboard. We have Divya on the top, Vikram catching up, Ketan still there, hanging in. Vigneshwaran is close. Who is the CEO of Salesforce? This should be a very simpler and a straightforward. And you should know where your vote should go to. Atul Gupta, right?
This is the simplest.
Simplest one. Yes, the
Yes.
vote should go for local leader
Yeah.
of our.
Yeah.
Oh, there are two people who thinks Atul Gupta is a CEO. Huh? Atul, if you're there on the call, you owe a treat to those two people. But Brett Taylor is the right answer. Charlie and Peter are again Salesforce leaders, but not the CEO. Let's see if there is any change. Vikram is on the top. Sesha climbs back. Let's see. True or false? While doing deployments in production, does Salesforce always execute run all test? This is for production, okay, not sandboxes. Yes, it was a trickier one. So if you are deploying any config items, not server-side components, then your run all test will not execute. And I've actually double checked on the documentation before putting in this question because I was not sure myself. But anyways, let's see if there is any change. So Divya climbs back. Good job. Which type of sandbox would you recommend for data testing? Production, do it directly on production, partial copy, developer pro, or a full copy?
I think this is a simpler one.
It's a simpler one. It all depends how you understand the sandbox as well.
Yes.
A full copy one, right?
Yes.
Nice. I think with that, Vikram, A, Ishwar, and Ketan are on the top board. The last question. Forms of communication. This is very simple, guys. It's a multi-select. Select whichever you think is a form of communication. I've spoken about them in my session today, so it should be very straightforward. All right, so still there are people who think that some of them are not forms of communication, right? So everything is a form of communication, whatever I've listed here. So with that, let's take the feedback for this session today. You have 90 seconds to type in any of your feedback, good, bad, improvements, suggestions. This is our last session for the series, so I really appreciate all of your feedback, guys. And if you don't want to share your feedback, honest feedback on this session right now, you can always write up to me on developer2consultant@gmail.com and I will respond there as well.
Guys, please try to provide a constructive feedback so that like we can improve our upcoming future sessions. Because see, these D2 sessions, New Delhi Developer Group will conduct every year. So if you have any suggestions and if you want us to improve somewhere, and if you want like in this series, if you want to include some topics what we have not covered till now, then definitely we work on that with Rupesh sir, and definitely we want to make this series more interesting for you in next year.
All right, last few seconds, guys. All right, so 7 of them were not able to submit it, right? Don't, never mind. You can always write a mail to me. Let's see what those feedbacks were, and I'll go through them in detail once I have some time. All right, so thank you for all of this, right? Um, all right, so there's one question here. What could be the path for a person not having consultant but having a lot of technical experience? Maybe person is having product domain experience. So a very valid question and a very valid stuff, right? I face this a lot more when I'm interacting with people during events, during conferences. So technical person, right, can only see, you can have a technical growth in your uh, product expertise or domain expertise wherever you have, right, to a certain point in time. And because we are in a IT services industry where most of it is client service or client delivery, right? In India specifically, your growth will be limited if you're just banking on your technical expertise. Okay, and that's why I'm talking this about the consulting experience. That's why I'm talking about the consulting mindset, because what I'm talking here is your technical knowledge is one thing, but how do you apply the technical knowledge to solve real world problems? And to solve a problem, you need to first understand that problem. You need to be very confident of what technical solution you can apply to that problem. How do you resolve it and how do you communicate it, right? So these are attributes for a professional to grow, no matter what kind of expertise you have, whether it's on technical side, functional side, or in whichever product you have, right? I think unless you have these, some of these additional attributes, your growth will be limited or restricted by the parameters which I just talked about, right? Because to be fact, we are in an IT services industry where client service and client delivery are given its importance or priorities over anything else. And maybe if you just want to focus just on technical, and if you are limited by growth, if that's the challenge, then outside India may be the right place for you, where product experience or product expertise is given its due importance. Unfortunately, in India, there are very few companies where product expertise is given its due importance, right? And I don't blame anyone, or I'm not a critic of all of this. I'm just saying that majority of the Indian IT services focuses on client service and client delivery, and that's where my whole experience has been, and that's where I think there is a need of getting more people. There is a need of awareness about all of this with the people, and that's where I'm doing all of these sessions. So it may or may not be applied to you, but I personally think we need more consultants in this space. All right, so with that, let's look at the leaderboard. So Sesha, congratulations. Divya, congratulations. And Vikram, congratulations. Great job, guys. And Vivek Singh and Ishwar are the runners up. So good job, guys. Congratulations. I hope you find the Udemy course helpful for your career path. And yeah, thank you for being a lovely audience from last 3 weeks. I really appreciate all of your feedback, all of your time that you have spent with me over the weekends. These are tough times. Stay safe, guys. And hoping to see you all in person one day, in an event or in a conference, or maybe in New Delhi user group someday. With that, over to you, Sachin. Thanks a lot, guys.
Thank you, Rupesh, for this wonderful session. Congratulations, all the winners. Please put your email ID on the chat window so that we can like activate your course at your Udemy account.
Again,
And thank you very much. Please stay connected with New Delhi SFTC, Doug.
just
You can, yeah,
Sachin,
yeah,
Sushant.
yeah, Sachin,
go
just
ahead.
one. Yeah, so first of all, I would like to thank Rupesh sir for giving his time and for sharing his knowledge with all of us. And I think all these three sessions are really informative and really helpful for all of us. And again, thank you so much, Rupesh sir, for being a part of our Impact Salesforce Saturday initiative, and definitely we will plan more sessions in upcoming years as well, because New Delhi is quietly very connected with this D2C initiative you have taken for this our entire Trailblazer community groups. And every year we will conduct these D2 sessions offline, but since due to this COVID pandemic, we have to arrange these sessions uh, online this year. But if situations get better next year, then definitely we will conduct an offline session, what we usually do every year. So again, thank you so much, sir. And guys, uh, this is the not a last series. We have lots of series aligned in our upcoming months, and next year is a full of Einstein. Uh,
Sushant,
yeah,
sorry to interrupt you. I would like to share my screen so
sure,
that audience can see what we are planning next.
sure, sure.
So, guys, we are planning a Einstein AI series. This would be covered by all of the Einstein champions. As you can see, from we are planning this series. This would be running from 26th of September, and it will last till October 31st. So we are covering all whole October, in which we are planning 6 sessions, which will be running by the Einstein champion. You can see in the screen that first session has been innovate fast with AI in Salesforce platform, which would be running by the Rajiv Patel. Second one is the covering by the Rajat Jain. Rajat Jain. This would be on 3rd of October. After that, we are planning the session on 10th of October, and we have 17th of October, 24th, and 31st. So we are planning a whole series in Einstein AI, which would be running by Einstein Champion, and we are planning lots of new and exciting things so that audience can get more insightful knowledge in that. And we are planning a we are planning to give away a certification voucher in that series also. So these are the things from my side. Sushant, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Vishal, for this information. And guys, congratulations to all the Kahoot winners from this today's session. And guys, along with that, we also reserve 5 Udemy vouchers for our social media champions. So please show your love for this D2C series and on LinkedIn or Twitter, and try to retweet, reshare, and share your experience on LinkedIn and Twitter if you like this session, and try to reshare your posts over there. Just um, try to add New Delhi SFDC DUG hashtag and its Twitter handle. Try to tag Rupesh Bhatia sir, and try to tag Walid El Hor, our sponsor for this entire series. And and then within 3 or 4 days later, we will uh, disclose our social media champions on LinkedIn, and then on Twitter as well. And then we will personally reach out to them, and then we will like give away the Udemy vouchers to them as well. So so please post as many as posts you can do on LinkedIn, Twitter, and show your love for this session. And thank you all. Stay connected with us. Stay safe, stay healthy, and we will see you all in our next series on Einstein.
Guys, please share your email address on the chat window. As I can see, many of you haven't shared your email ID to us. So we will wait
Yeah,
for 1 or 2 minutes so that we can get all of the winners' email ID. and then we can end up the session.
Yeah, Vishal, we got that. I got that one. All the email IDs, I got them. All the 5 winners have their email ID.